Buried deep within the occupied Norwegian countryside in 1942 lay the Norsk hydro plant at Vemork. It was one of the few places in the world capable of producing heavy water on an industrial scale, and it had become central to Germany's efforts to produce an atomic bomb. This is the story of how in one night a small team of Norwegian Commandos snuck into the plant and completely derailed Germany's nuclear project. This episode is brought to you by CuriosityStream, a subscription streaming service that offers thousands of documentaries and non-fiction titles from some of the world's best filmmakers. Get unlimited access for just $2.99 a month or $14.99 a year. And you can also get 30 days for free at curiositystream.com/historiograph with the promo code Historigraph. More on this later. German interest in the Norsk hydro plant began in January 1940, when a representative from the industrial giant IG Farben arrived to inquire about Germany purchasing the company's entire stock of deuterium oxide, known commonly as heavy water. Furthermore, the Germans wanted Norsk hydro to increase their production so they could buy 100 kilograms a month. This would require the plant to increase its production tenfold. The German representative declined to say what his country needed such a large amount of heavy water for. The answer was that heavy water had been identified as a suitable moderator for a uranium nuclear reactor. It had been forecast that they would need 5 tons of the water to operate one successfully. The company declined to sell, and it wasn't until early May 1940 that the Germans got their hands on the plant during their invasion. Within months of the occupation, German scientists arrived at the plant to oversee increased production. It did not take long for rumours about the increased activity at Norsk hydro to reach Allied ears. The British Special Operations Executive, an agency opened in July 1940 with the task of setting Europe ablaze with sabotage and resistance, was soon well informed, utilising a nascent Norwegian resistance network. By 1942, reports from Vemork had intensified, and SOE decided to find out for itself what was going on. It recruited into its Scandinavian section Einar Schøneland, a Norwegian hydroelectric engineer who worked at the nearby Mørs Dam and who had escaped to Britain in the spring of 1942. Schøneland was swiftly parachuted back into Norway, explaining his absence to friends and colleagues as a skiing trip. He quickly set to work, talking to friends who worked at the Vemork plant and observing the amount of security in place around it. In April 1942, Schøneland reported to London that the Germans were producing 120 kilograms a month of heavy water and rising. This was troubling news, but though they had their suspicions, SOE did not know for sure what the Germans wanted with all that heavy water. This changed when the German scientist Hans Seuss was overheard directly connecting these shipments of heavy water from Vemork to Germany's nuclear program. This was the confirmation the British needed, and they set about devising a plan to neutralise the plant. A bombing raid was briefly considered but ruled out due to the risk to the local population. Instead, the War Cabinet decided to mount a full-on ground offensive to storm and destroy the plant's machinery, and handed the planning over to Combined Operations, the department responsible for the commando forces. A 2-stage plan was devised. First, a 4-man SOE advance party, codenamed Grouse, would be parachuted in near to Vemork. The team would prepare a landing area for 2 gliders full of heavily armed commandos, which would assault and destroy the plant in Operation Freshman. After extensive training and a period of waiting for the Norwegian nights to be long enough for Allied aircraft to overfly the area unseen, the 4-man Grouse team was dropped east of Fjarðarfit on October 18, 1942. Lieutenant Jens Poulsen led the team, consisting of Klaus Hellberg, Knut Hoglund and his second-in-command, Sergeant Arne Schjelstrup. They landed 30 miles east of Vemork and would spend the next 2 weeks trekking to the proposed landing site for the gliders on the Skuland marshes. Grouse arrived in the Vemork area by November 9th and awaited the arrival of the commandos. After waiting for a suitable full moon, on the night of November 19th, Operation Freshman was launched, with 2 Halifax bombers piloted by Squadron Leader A. Wilkinson and Flight Lieutenant Arthur Parkinson taking off from RAF Skitton in the northeast of Scotland. They towed 2 Horsa gliders packed with 34 British commandos. Things went well as they flew across the North Sea, but Parkinson took his plane low to get underneath thick banks of clouds. Misjudging his approach to the coast, his Halifax smashed into a mountainside near Egerton, killing the crew. 3 commandos were also killed in the crash. The Halifax, piloted by squadron leader Wilkinson, fared somewhat better, reaching the interior of Norway only to discover that the navigation system that would locate the landing area was not working, and that due to thick cloud they were unable to see the landing lights below. Circling the area for a while in a vain attempt to make out the landscape, eventually they turned for home, only for the tow cable to snap as the Halifax crossed the Norwegian coast. The glider plummeted into a spin and 8 on board were killed as it smashed into the ground. The surviving commandos were captured, interrogated by the Gestapo and then executed, according to Hitler's newly issued commando order. Operation Freshman had been a disaster, and even worse, the Germans were now well aware of Allied interest in the plant at Vemork. Security was stepped up, and so a different approach would need to be found to neutralise it. Responsibility for finding this was handed over to SOE's Norwegian section under Colonel Jack Wilson. In the meantime, the grouse team would have to wait out the harsh winter, scavenging what food they could in the Norwegian wilderness. It was decided that with a guns blazing assault on the plant now out of the question, a smaller scale sabotage operation could be mounted, codenamed Operation Gunnerside. The plan involved a further team of 6 Norwegian SOE agents being dispatched to Vemork. Lieutenant Joachim Rønberg would lead Sergeant Frederick Kaiser, Sergeant Hans Storhau, Lieutenant Kasper Edlund, Sergeant Birger Stromsheim and Lieutenant Knut Hauklid. After a few weeks of intense training using an exact replica of the plant, Gunnerside was dropped on February 16, 1943. They were 30 miles north of Vemork, and the long trek to rendezvous with grouse was frustrated by nasty winter storms. By February 27th, Gunnerside and grouse were finally together at a small log cabin a couple of miles north of Vemork. Sergeant Hellberg reported the details of security at the plant to the group. At night there were just 2 sentries guarding the main approach to the plant. The rest of the garrison, around 20 soldiers, would be asleep in the barracks. This was encouraging but posed a dilemma. The easiest way to approach Norsk Hydro was across a narrow suspension bridge to its north, with a steep drop into a ravine on either side of it. Crossing the bridge though would mean certain detection and a firefight with the sentries, alerting the garrison and throwing the operation into chaos. The team decided that they would need to descend into the ravine, cross the River Morna and then climb the other side. At 8 PM on February 27th, the Gunnerside team began its journey to Vemork. A bright full moon lit the landscape and aided the team in picking out a suitably frozen section of the river to cross, some way east of the plant. Before descending, the commandos took off their white camouflage to reveal khaki-coloured British Army uniforms, worn in order to try and prevent reprisals against the civilian population should they be detected. Then they descended 328 feet to the bottom of the ravine, hurried across the river and began a painstaking 492 feet climb up the other side, clinging onto the roots of stubby bushes as footholds and handholds. After the climb and a further half-mile hike, Gunnerside finally arrived at Norsk Hydro at 23:45, 15 minutes before the changing of the guard on the bridge. Lying in wait long enough to let the new guards get comfortable, at midnight Sergeant Shellstrip darted forwards, followed by the rest of the team. Shellstrip cut the padlock on an unguarded side gate and they streamed through, splitting up into a demolition team and a covering team. The covering team took up positions around the plant, watching the barracks, bridge and gates. The demolition team headed for the plant in 2 pairs. The basement door was found to be locked, so Rønberg and Kaiser headed around the building, crawling through a cable duct to get inside. The second pair, Stromsheim and Edlund, on finding the door locked, headed in the opposite direction around the plant looking for a way in. Inside, Rønberg and Kaiser pushed open the door to the room containing the electrolysis cells, the means of producing the heavy water. There were 18 in total, connected to enormous storage tanks holding the accumulated water. On entering the room, they came face to face with Gustav Johansen, the building's caretaker. Johansen was startled but did not raise the alarm. The commandos scrambled to set the charges, aided by Stromsheim and Edlund after they arrived. After a brief panic when the caretaker was unable to locate his glasses, the fuses were set and the commandos made a run for it. The explosion, when it came, was a bit of an anticlimax. Outside it was a distant, dull thud. The walls of the plant were so thick that they contained almost all of the blast. Inside though, the basement was a wreck. All the electrolysis cells were destroyed and more than 3,000 pounds of heavy water was pouring down the plant's drains. At the barracks, Hawklid and Paulson observed only a single soldier awoken by the explosion, making his way outside and slowly toward the plant. Waiting just long enough for the guard to disappear around the corner, the two commandos retreated, rejoining the rest of the team as they retraced their steps out of the compound. As quickly as they had arrived, the commandos melted away. By the time the lone sentry had discovered the damage and raised the alarm, all 9 Norwegians were already at the bottom of the ravine and away safely. Once they were safe, the Gunnerside team split up. Some skied their way to Sweden, and others laid low in Norway for future operations. A short radio message was sent to London. Operation carried out with 100% success. High concentration plant completely destroyed. Shots not exchanged since the Germans did not realise anything. The German commander in Norway, General von Falkenhorst, was furious at the raid. 2 years' worth of heavy water production had been destroyed, and Germany's efforts in developing an atomic bomb dealt a substantial setback. By 9 Norwegians, all without a shot being fired. This video is sponsored by CuriosityStream. CuriosityStream is home to a wide variety of programs from science and nature to history and technology. I particularly liked Bombing War, from Guernica to Hiroshima. It's a documentary on the evolution of bombing warfare through history. It's made me want to learn more about the topic and maybe even make a future video on the subject. Get unlimited access starting at just $2.99 a month or $14.99 a year, and the first 30 days are completely free if you sign up at curiositystream.com/historiograph and use the promo code historiograph. Thanks again to CuriosityStream for helping to make this video possible.